Let's get into it now. A spoiler-free review of Spaceman on Netflix starring the $73 million making Adam Sandler. Is he worth the vast amount of money that Netflix has invested in him in over the years? And I am a huge Adam Sandler fan. So much so that in the early stages of this podcast, I had to enlist a rule that I would have to stop talking about Adam Sandler so much because I mentioned him in literally every single episode. And a very nice member of the movie crew was like, dude, you gotta stop mentioning Adam Sandler. And in regard to Spaceman, I was very interested and intrigued by this movie when the trailer first dropped. I included it here on the Trailer Park because that is the type of movie I love to see Adam Sandler in, the more dramatic side of him, which I think he does really well. I listened to him recently on Conan O'Brien's podcast talking about how he decided to make that switch, knowing that he wanted to have a long-standing career in movies, and credits a lot of that to Paul Thomas Anderson, who was able to put him in Punch Drunk Love, which everybody saw and thought, oh, the Sandman can do different things. But he really hasn't done a sci-fi movie like this, and you pair him up with an amazing cast with Carey Mulligan and Paul Dano, who, if you just look at that lineup, that is like my dream lineup. I have loved Carey Mulligan ever since Drive, and Paul Dano has also become one of my favorite actors with The Riddler, The Fablemans, Dumb Money. He is another actor who can do it all from drama to comedy and comic book movies. So all this cast together, and then in one of my favorite genres, I love movies about space and isolation, but what we learned in this movie and what you've learned from past sci-fi movies, those are really hard movies to do because space and isolation can quickly turn boring. Because really, the trouble that space movies have is that they are so isolated and have such a limited cast that it creates this level of boredom that you're trying to represent. Because in space, it is boring. I've never been to space, I've never talked to an astronaut, but the way it is depicted, it is very isolating. It is very lonely. It is very hard on the body to be that far away from humanity, is a whole nother level of isolation. And when you start to showcase that, it's going to be really hard to create a captivating movie. So you have to have a really, really strong story and a really strong lead to make it work. Did it work in this case? Sad to say, it did not. But I'll tell you more about why it didn't. When it comes to Spaceman, the movie cost $40 million to make. Not that bad, really, when you look at it. Primarily, what a space movie spends a lot of the budget on is just the dynamics of creating a spaceship and also creating the weightlessness of somebody in space. Just having that effect, them tethered throughout the entire movie, is extremely expensive, I've come to learn by researching these movies. And this movie did a very average job on creating something that looked like we hadn't seen it before in a space movie. I almost wish it had a little bit more of a dynamic presence. He is half a year into this space mission. He is the furthest away from any human in history to go, way out into Jupiter. He is investigating this really mysterious cloud that has formed. It is like this purple cosmic presence in the sky that they can see from the Earth. The movie takes place in a retro futuristic version of the 90s, and it really deals with isolation and Adam Sandler's character being described as the loneliest person in the world because he is so far away from the love of his life, and they're not only separated in distance, but also separated emotionally. Essentially, what this movie is about, isolation and the crumbling of a relationship. And I don't think Adam Sandler was strong enough to really pull it off. And I've loved him in the dramatic roles I've been mentioning, but I think this one required another level of acting that I realized he just didn't really have it in him. And that hurts me to say because he did an amazing job in movies like Uncut Gems, where I thought he deserved an Oscar. That one had a lot more action. I felt like he really owned that character. But in this case, seeing him as a spaceman was a little bit unbelievable for me from the very beginning. Just him floating around on the spaceship, but even just seeing a photo of him in the astronaut uniform, I just couldn't buy into the fact that Adam Sandler, this really wacky guy, was a spaceman. And in other times, I've been able to look past that, but it was really hard in this situation. Just hearing him deliver some of this dialogue, found it really unbelievable in probably an unfair way just because of the association I have with him. I do like some of the avenues that the movie tried to explore with commentary on the human condition, but also on like corporate sponsorship. Because in the movie, they prioritize his cameras working more than they prioritize his toilet working because they are live streaming this entire thing. They have these weird sponsorship things that he has to read and do commercials while he's in space. So they never really got back to a whole lot of that. I thought that would have been a cooler angle to approach the live stream aspect, kind of more like a Truman Show vibe of people that were also invested in his relationship. The appeal of watching him in space and people being able to control things, I think really would have been a cool way to make this movie more interesting. I know it's based on a novel, so they were probably following the source material more, but that light was going off in my head of they had a great opportunity here to make this movie a little bit more interesting because quite honestly, it felt like his character in Funny People who was kind of a version of Adam Sandler. And in that movie, they make fun of the movie roles he takes on because they're so over the top and wacky. This almost felt like one of those movies that it would cut to him like, well, I just did this sci-fi movie and it's him looking at a place in a spacesuit. And overall, when making a movie that deals with isolation, I felt isolated and bored while watching it. This movie should have been retitled The Sandman Talks to a Spider because that is what Paul Dano voices in this movie. It's this weird alien futuristic spider looking thing that comes onto a ship and they form this really weird relationship and it tries so hard to reach this emotional level that doesn't really quite get there. And I love Paul Dano. I think he did the best job that he could with this role, but I found the character so annoying and so uninteresting. Just the look and design of it, it felt like a first draft to me. And maybe it's because I wanted it to look more like an alien. I just thought the idea of a spider crawling around didn't really match with all the other aspects of the movie. And then the dialogue was so repetitive. I hated the way he kept calling Adam Sandler's character skinny human, kept saying it over and over again. I was about to shut off my TV and stop watching it because I was so annoyed by that line and quite frankly bored with the entire story, which leads me to my next point is the only reason I continued to watch this movie to the very end is because of the cast. So when you start to think about, is Adam Sandler worth the money that Netflix pays him with the over 500 hours that Netflix viewers spend with his movies? For this reason alone, he is worth it because what they value so much is completion rate. Somebody to start and finish a movie on Netflix, that is the goal. And that is the only reason I finished this movie because I wanted to see how Adam Sandler was going to get out of this, what the conclusion was going to be. And that was very underwhelming to me too. But I think that is the reason you pay him a lot of money because people are going to Netflix to watch an Adam Sandler movie. It's still number one on their streaming service after over a week of being out. Again, I don't really know how they determine that. They could easily boost it like, oh, look, it's number one. The most people are watching it. They could lie about it just because they want to promote that movie the most. So I don't fully believe in that top 10 ranking on Netflix, but it's the metrics we have to go on because they really don't share how many people watch their movies. You really only get stats like the amount of hours that Netflix users have been watching Adam Sandler movies. He ranks up there in the top. So overall, I just don't think this role was in the range of the Sandman. You have to be an actor on the level of like Sandra Bullock and Gravity, Brad Pitt and Ad Astra to really be able to show something so isolating. Outer space movies are a really, really tough category, and I just felt like he didn't have all the tools in his acting abilities to pull this movie off. And the overall story really wasn't helping him. Carey Mulligan was still fantastic in it. She can really do no wrong in my eyes. It's just I wasn't really buying into their love story. It was also cool to see Kunal Nayyar, aka Raj from The Big Bang Theory. It took me a second to realize it was him. So I think that is another sign that, hey, he can do roles outside of The Big Bang Theory and not seem so distracting. He was the guy communicating with Adam Sandler's character throughout. So not the most outstanding of supporting roles, but it was just nice to see somebody familiar in a much different space. I was going into this movie expecting to love it, ended up having a pretty mediocre time. For Spaceman, I give it 2 out of 5 spacesuits.